Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. I'm really excited to continue Late Night Learning. It's been pretty difficult to be waiting to be able to do this amid COVID-19 and race riots and a downward economy and moving to the Darden School of Business at Virginia. There's been a lot of transitions going for a lot of us, and this show, I think, at least for me, is very meaningful because I'm able to convey information to people. I'm able to discuss a topic in depth. I'm able to really get at elements that are behind the scenes in what we experience as media consumers. And so I had missed for a while not doing these videos. And so here we are trying a different kind of recording. I am recording from Charlottesville, Virginia, and the fine people at White Plains Public Access over in New York are still allowing me to record videos, and they are still putting their fairy dust and magical touches onto these videos. And so I'm very grateful for that. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dennis, for allowing me to continue on with Late Night Learning. I do believe that this year, Late Night Learning will take off probably a bit more than it has in the past, given the emphasis on videos for college education, higher education, finding different ways of communicating with students and trying to find just that tertiary form of education that's a bit more interactive, a bit more fun, a bit more visual, a bit more colorful. In the future, I've played around with Zoom, and I am hoping to have live lectures via Zoom for all people to watch. And so please, if you are watching this, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Late Night Learning, Anthony Palomba. You'll be able to find it quite easily on YouTube. The background here is the background for UVA. They are pushing all professors to use this. I am proud to be a UVA faculty member, and so I am thrilled to be sharing this background here with you. Now, let me just shrink myself just a little bit, just to be sure that you can see the rest of this lecture. Today, we're going to be going through case studies and history in blockbuster transmedia franchises. And so, oftentimes when we go to the movies, especially in the last few years, we see a lot of blockbusters, we see a lot of heroic content, movies that are replete with people in latex suits fighting off evil and contending with villains and saving the day. And so what we're going to be looking at is kind of, how did all of this come to be? How did it come to be that you and I can go to a movie theater and see 10 showings of Transformers or 10 showings of the Avengers or what have you? And what might be the implications of this moving forward? We know recently that AMC and a few other movie chains have opened their doors back post-COVID-19 to the rest of the community in the United States and beyond. From this, though, we know that it's going to be a bit of a rough road for the movie industry in really reclaiming its audience, really getting people back into movie theaters. And so in this lecture, have that in the back of your mind. How can we bring people back to the movies? We know that people like bombastic, loud, fast, action-based movies, movies with fast paces, fast sequences, incredible fighting tactics. You need a large screen for that. Science shows that you need a large screen for that. There have been previous studies that have illustrated that, in fact, bigger screens allow for immersion. Bigger screens allow for sequences to be interpreted and processed even more deeply by people. So in other words, if you're seeing a chase scene or you're seeing a car chase scene, we are further immersed, we are processing it more fully when we have large screens at our disposal. And so this is something that a lot of film auteurs, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, people who really have their own director signature or their own director emblem, have really pushed to have movies featured on large screens only. but we know that some of you stream movies on TV sets. We know that some of you stream movies on cell phones. How should movies be enjoyed? Does it matter what genre or platform? I recently published a study in the Journal of Retailing and Consumer Services that goes through this. I believe it's a few videos back from this if anybody's interested in learning more about this. The case is clear. The movie industry will have to reconcile, do rom-coms belong in movie theaters anymore? Do horror movies belong in movie theaters anymore? Or can some of these genres be streamable? Time will tell. Without further ado, let's get started. Box office. Here we have, in billions of US dollars, the 10 highest grossing movie franchises of all time. We can see here that we have Marvel, Star Wars, Harry Potter, James Bond, Lord of the Rings, Fast and Furious, X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman, Pirates of the Caribbean. And so these franchises are powerful because their box office sales over time are astounding. They are in the billions and billions of dollars. What are some themes here? Why do some of these franchises work? Is there anything that we can pick up from them? What do they have in common? Fantasy. When we look at all of these particular franchises, we can see how important fantasy is for people. We can see here that Marvel and Star Wars and Harry Potter, they all incorporate fantastical universes. Lord of the Rings, X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman to a large extent, Pirates of the Caribbean. We know that James Bond is a bit more like the world around us. Even Batman, to an extent, is a bit more like the world around us. Perhaps the same could be said for Spider-Man, although, you know, in relativity to other movie genres that are based in true reality. And so what we can see here is that largely people respond well to fantasy movies. Why? Why do we seek out fantasy? Why do we need it? What does it do for us? Does it give us an escape? The opportunity to jettison and abandon all things in our lives just so we can get a break. My mom's on me, the dog's on me, I've got homework, I've got things to do. It would be great to be in a black box for a few hours and forget everything. And so here we can see that people respond well to this. This is something that people absolutely respond well to. People want an escape, to be able to get away, to assume other characters, or to watch other characters, to forget about problems. This continues to be a mainstay for entertainment consumption. If we think about this then, what inspires you to watch multiple movies within a franchise? What makes for a good media franchise? Are franchises good or bad? When we think about these questions, and I do want you to kind of pause this video, take a few moments to think about this. Why would you continue to watch bits and pieces of a franchise? What are key storytelling elements for a good franchise? Is the franchise model good or bad? Does it wind up watering down the quality of movies? Or is it robust storytelling? Take a few moments, pause this video, consider these questions. Your own answers you can place right down below at the comments section. Think about why we consume franchises. Go ahead, ladies and gentlemen. And so you're back. Excellent. And so keep those comments right down below in the comment section for this video. I am curious to read them. I am excited to read them. I will respond to you if you post something meaningful. Let's continue. Movie franchises. Why are these a good frame of reference for transmedia storytelling? When we think about transmedia storytelling, we're thinking about storytelling in an ecosystem. right? We're thinking about storytelling in a manner in which stories are 2D and 3D and take on multiple forms. We know that we can go to Harry Potter World down in Orlando, Florida, and we can drink beer and eat jelly beans from the stories. We know that we can go watch the movies. We know that we can read the books. These are different touchstones for consumers to figure out how intimate do we want to be with Harry Potter, the world, the ecosystem, the characters. How close do we want to be? Do we want to read a book that allows us to imagine what Harry might look like, what everybody else might look like, what everybody else might sound like? Or do we want a movie? A movie is a bit further into a world. The director tells us what Harry looks like, what Dumbledore sounds like, and his mannerisms and his actions. So we're kind of informed as the audience what to know, what to expect, and maybe even what to think. Then we go a step further. We go into the world, into Diagon Alley, down in Orlando, Florida. And we're able to walk around the world, be immersed, and get a sense of what it must be like to be in that world, to be part of the action, the candor, the glamour, the food, the clothing, the wands, all of these elements we get to consume. And so when we talk about transmedia storytelling, what we are talking about is this notion of how are we building this ecosystem? What do we want it to look like? What do we want our fans to have a piece of? What do they show us? Arguably, then, based on the definition that I've given you, transmedia storytelling allows us to consume the way we want to consume. Do you want beer, jelly beans from the Harry Potter world, or do you not? Some fans will consume everything: comics, books, movies, food, clothing. So they have intimate knowledge of Harry Potter's world. They also allow us to consume in any kind of order. Please note this. Today, I can read all of the books first before I see all of the movies, or I can see one movie and then read one book, or I can see all of the movies and never read the books. There are different ways for me to come into this ecosystem and have my own experience. This means that if you do conduct transmedia storytelling, audiences are able to customize their own experiences. If we think about choose your own adventure, right? Any choose your own adventure book, we get to decide where we go. Transmedia storytelling allows us to decide where to go, how we want to go, what we want to consume, when we want to consume it. And so we're given a lot of opportunities to decide what our next step is. Why focus on transmedia storytelling? Transmedia storytelling really allows us to build a world for our senses, for our 5 senses that seek to be piqued and seek to be stimulated. Who would have thought that I would be able to eat some of the food from Harry Potter? Who would think that I would be able to hold a wand like Harry Potter holds a wand? We get to give consumers different degrees of consumption, different degrees in which they get to relate to characters. Star Wars. Arguably, Star Wars really started this idea of blockbuster franchises. In the 70s, late 70s into the early 80s, we have Jaws, and we have these movies that begin to come out. Star Wars, of course, really setting this trend alongside Jaws, in which we have these big, bombastic movies full of violence and action, starring actors and actresses who are larger than life and who really inspire us to think about entire worlds beyond a 90-minute movie that we can find ourselves in and that we can consume and play in. And so Star Wars really begins with this man, George Lucas. Now, George Lucas was from Modesto, California, and he began working on an operatic space movie in 1971 based on Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. So he's got this sense that people like opera and people like big, swinging stories replete with characters and dialogue and details. And remember, up until this point, Broadway had been for upper class patrons. The opera was really reserved for upper class patrons. And so how do you construct an opera for everyone, right? We think about Broadway today. We know that Rent and a bunch of Disney musicals that have come out with Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. Broadway has been democratized in a very, very profound way in which everybody can access these musicals. Although the price is extremely high at this point, everybody can access the content, right? We're not talking about going to see Rigoletto, although I've seen Rigoletto, highly recommend it. We're not talking about people going to the Met to see Rigoletto. We're talking about people getting immersed in opera without realizing they're in an opera. The same phenomenon can be mapped onto, wait for it, WWE. World Wrestling Entertainment is one big fat opera in which we have all of this drama and fighting and violence and backstabbing and building up and falling down that we do see in earlier literature, Iliad and the Odyssey, in ancient Greek literature. And so there's always been this interest in deep storytelling. The question is, how do you reach audiences? Audiences' tastes and preferences change. Try watching a movie from the 80s or 90s. They're slower. The pace is slower. I actually prefer that. I think it's better for character development. But today, to develop characters, plots of most movies and paces of most movies are hastening. They've quickened extraordinarily so that more is fit into a 90-minute movie than used to be 2 hours ago or so. And so here we can see American Graffiti, based on Lucas's childhood. It cost about $1 million to make, but it grosses $50 million. He went on to USC and went on to work on several films, including Finian's Rainbow, The Rain People, and Gimme Shelter as well. So at this point, George Lucas is really, really building a following here. People are beginning to notice who he is and what he is and what he's capable of here. And so before Star Wars, science fiction usually performed poorly in the box office. So not only are you trying to take highbrow entertainment, opera, sophisticated drama, but you're pairing it alongside science fiction, which up until that point, The Day the Earth Stood Still, movies like that were profound for their day, but science fiction was looked at as kind of campy and was not really a genre to be taken seriously, was not some sort of harbinger for the future. People really didn't use science fiction as a vehicle to talk about what could be or what could exist or what if this happened. And so we begin to see boundaries and barriers shaken up by George Lucas. The success of the first Star Wars film. The film itself cost $11 million to make, and it grossed $513 million. Debuts May 25th, 1977. It really did inspire movie makers to consider special effects, building an ecosystem, and blending opera and fantasy for adults. So now we're beginning to see you can do fantasy for adults. You can make movies that incorporate fantastical elements, all in an overarching effort to allow people to escape and to really conceptualize ideas in another realm. And let me also say this about science fiction. Science fiction has been vital to our ability to evolve in our own culture. The first interracial kiss was on Star Trek, the TV show, with William Shatner and another actress whose name is escaping me at the moment. And so interracial couples, all of these things, giving women rights, giving minorities rights, these controversial issues, these issues that have required campaigning and pounding the pavement by their own respective members. Science fiction allows us to tackle hard issues It's far harder to talk about the border in the United States than it is to talk about the border on Glorp Glorp, where there might be two different alien species, two different alien races, trying to figure out what to do with the border. Do we build a wall? Do we not build a wall? It's safer. Science fiction is safer, and it's a safe realm to talk about these complex issues. And so science fiction really, especially since the advent of Star Wars, has served as a vehicle by which we as a people can talk about the future. We as a people can talk about social progression, economic progression, cultural progression. Merchandise. Star Wars was big on merchandise. Lucas thought about science fiction movies and he said, well, you know, there's spaceships and there's guns and there's furry animals and characters and Chewbacca and all of these other elements. Is there any opportunity for merchandising? Do movies typically have merchandising? Up until this point, it was not really usual for movies to have spin-off toys and video games and things like that. After all, video games in its mainstream form, by which we know it, was still trying to figure out itself in the late 70s and early 80s. We know by 1985, Nintendo has resuscitated the video game industry, which suffered a crash in 1983. Lucas thought about science fiction. So 6 months before the release of the movie, he begins to look at toy deals. Hasbro and Mattel are just not interested. And to this day, they are kicking themselves because Star Wars has proved to be one of the most merchandisable intellectual properties of all time. Bar none, no competition whatsoever. Kenner Toys in Cincinnati takes it over. And Kenner's not doing so hot at this point. They're really looking for a particular intellectual property that will really help them get right back into the black. They're kind of in the red at this point. They're kind of a small toy company, but they don't really have much going on. And so for every toy dollar sold, Kenner earned 95 cents. This was the first toy deal. Lucas earned 2.5 cents. 21st Century Fox earned 2.5 cents. After the first movie for Star Wars, Lucas sees that this is an issue, and so he works to reconstruct this particular toy deal. Needless to say, Star Wars saves Kenner, makes it a player in the toy industry. Star Wars memorabilia. It's generated over $700 million by 2015. Today, the franchise itself is worth about $42 billion, and memorabilia continues to be sold today. The future of the Star Wars franchise. So we know that Disney has had Star Wars for about 8 years now, and they've created a few movies, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and you can see that the box office and the cost to make the movie have been astronomical. They've performed quite well. A rule of thumb in looking at the movie industry, if your movie costs $200 million, you should be making at least $400 million or $600 million to really kind of have any kind of blockbuster, if you will. And so these movies, needless to say, $200 million to make, you're grossing about $1 billion, 1.3 billion, $2 billion, you're making astronomical loads of money for sure. And so Disney has been very, very successful with the Star Wars franchise. Marvel. So we know that Star Wars was really responsible for a lot of what had gone on with movie franchises. In the 80s, we also get Indiana Jones, which George Lucas has a hand in along with Spielberg, and we have other franchises that keep going. Batman, for one, being another franchise. And so slowly but surely, we see that fantasy and superheroes begin to be good predictors of really solid franchises. These stories tend to be very, very complex, love interests, tons of villains, a very, very deep and often sad origin story. There is no happy origin story for Superman. There is no happy origin story for Batman. And so when we think about these stories, there's a lot of drama. There are multiple villains. There are resolutions temporarily. And we know that there's always a constant threat. which forces us to tune in and to see what the do-gooders are going to be doing against these villains. And often these villains are, kind of a countervailing notion, a yin to somebody's yang. If we look at Batman, if we look at Joker, Joker is an extroverted psychopath. Batman is an introverted, perhaps less psychopathic psychopath. Batman is in all black. Joker is in purple and green and white and red. And so often there are contrasting features of a hero versus a villain. Luke Skywalker, good looking, handsome, in kind of a garb, nothing sophisticated, with a lightsaber. Darth Vader, in black, kind of embracing that steampunk kind of look in a sense. Modern technology, powers, all of these other weapons at his disposal, the Death Star being one at one point. And so when we think about the appeal of these franchises, there's a lot to munch on. There's a lot to consume when we think about the story of the hero, the journey of the hero, and what the hero must face. The hero is often presented with some sort of conflict, and then they must go right that conflict. There's rising tension, and then we know that there's some resolution at the end. The world is mostly the same, but for a slight change, if any change at all. And so for Marvel, this has always been the case. It's been the case since the 1930s when Marvel was coming about, but it's a comic book. And comics are very, very popular, vastly popular in the 50s and 60s, but they're for children. And children shouldn't be going to movies with $200 and $300 million costs affixed to them. We may not be able to get them to those movies. And so a lot of movie executives are hesitant to invest that kind of money in a children's property. Obviously, this changes in the 70s and 80s as we begin to see that franchises are able to gain not only fanfare, but family fare for that matter. So with Marvel, we have our own comic book origins. So 1939, Marvel does start as a comic book company, first as Timely Publications, then Marvel Comics in 1961 with Stan Lee at the helm. A writer-editor there began creating superheroes that possessed longevity and appeal to adults. Several key artists leave in 1992, including Todd McFarlane, who did Spider-Man and later Spawn. Spawn is an excellent, excellent comic series. And of course, Jim Valentino, who later went on to do Guardians of the Galaxies. But comic book consumption in the 90s does dwindle a bit. People are kind of over it. This has been only one manner of storytelling for quite some time. The TV shows that have been attempted are kind of campy. If you watch the old Batman TV show starring Adam West, it's kind of an eye roll. Some of it is okay at best, but again, we're kind of saying to ourselves, yeah, this is all right. It doesn't really capture the Caped Crusader. It doesn't really capture the darkness, the mystery, the intrigue around Batman. Well, it's kind of campy, and you can kind of see his face, and the Batsuit is more unflattering than flattering, or imposing, or threatening. And so we do see a lot of instances in which these superheroes are thrusted into the limelight for everyone to watch, but with little fanfare. Disney purchased and beyond, but Disney does purchase Marvel in 2009. Disney begins to become in the business of accruing intellectual property. This is one of the hallmarks of Disney. And Disney had been involved in a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the past. Disney, of course, had, bought ABC, acquired ESPN. So this was a media conglomerate that was familiar with acquiring distribution, which was important for itself as a publicly traded company, to illustrate that it was acquiring companies that would help build its reach and estimated audiences. But if we're going after storytelling, and if we're going after appealing to everyone, Disney now appeals to everyone because of its slew and stable of intellectual property. So similar to Star Wars, this does allow for greater distribution and access to multiple media channels. Disney has no business on TNT or TBS, but Star Wars does. right? We know that Sundays and Saturdays, a lot of these cable channels will play movies. And so this is a great way for Disney to advertise. There's also talk starting in about 2015, 2016 of a Disney streaming service. And of course, in 2019, we were able to get that Disney streaming service. And so there is a movement to exploit intellectual property from characters and worlds created from comic books. And what we have here is this notion that these stories are already established. I can't begin to convey how important that is when you're in a marketplace, right? If you're the first to market and people know who you are, oh gosh, that's so much easier than introducing a new superhero, than introducing a new hero or villain or what have you, right? We know Lord of the Rings, it's based on books. We know Batman, comic, Marvel Studios, based on comics. We know that the story of Batman is about 85 years old. These stories have been told. We know that we have a built-in audience. So it works, and as you can see, it really works. So the Marvel box office for some of these movies, we have Black Panther, and shout out to Chadwick Boseman, who had recently passed as of this airing. A side note, Chadwick Boseman is an extraordinary actor, and the first movie I ever saw him in was A Message from the King, and I highly recommend that movie. That movie floored me, and I was very, very impressed with his performance. And he gave the performance of a lifetime in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, that's for sure. Avengers, we can see here, have done exceptionally well. Iron Man 3, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Spider-Man. And so we can see here these big bombastic movies offering multiple superheroes are terribly appealing, right? But for Iron Man, and Robert Downey Jr., in my opinion, does a phenomenal job as Tony Stark. Given some of his earlier challenges in his life, he was perfect for the role. We can see here that people want that opera, right? We see that an opera is embedded within all of these movies, that it's Greek choirs literally screaming and talking and singing, but they have latex suits on and they have masks on and they're chanting and they're yelling and they're getting people together. We can see some of the Greek oratory elements really embedded in a lot of these movies. And so it isn't that people don't like opera. It isn't that people don't like dramas or good storytelling. It just has to be told differently. More action, more color, faster, louder. But nonetheless, people still like and value good storytelling. Recent Marvel movies, we've had The Avengers, Spider-Man, Far From Home, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And so we're seeing that new actors are constantly incorporated into these movies. We're seeing new plot lines developed in these movies. And so these movies serve as kind of sub-franchises of the larger Marvel ecosystem. This gives Marvel the ability to kind of cross over superheroes from different sub-franchises into other franchises. So there's this opportunity for cross-promotion. There's this opportunity for ingredient branding, this idea of taking certain ingredients and putting them into a movie. So a parent brand would be Spider-Man, right? That's a parent brand. From there, we could put in an appearance from, Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. We can put in an appearance from somebody else, right? Oh, that's Robert Downey Jr. We should go see Iron Man or what have you. And so from these movies, then, everything becomes sticky. And there's this concept in marketing about stickiness, that consumers are able to kind of stick to certain products or services. The Marvel ecosystem itself is built such that you can enter from any angle. I mean, you don't have to see some of these movies in order. You don't have to see all of these movies in a particular order in the Marvel ecosystem. And it is built that way. I mean, obviously, the way that these movies were presented, chronological order is the best way to consume them, but these movies are made, if you look closely, from a standpoint in which we're able to kind of see that we can enter from any realm. So Disney has purchased a lot of intellectual property in the last decade. I'm curious to know from you, and please write in the comments below, what should Disney's next acquisition be? Should it buy a channel, streaming service, intellectual property? Where should Disney go? How should whatever it purchases be used by Disney? How much is the company valued at that you think Disney should purchase? Take a few moments, pause this video. I'm really curious to see your comments below. I will respond to them if they're meaningful. So you're back. Great. I hope you have really, really solid comments. I look forward to reading them. DC Comics. Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson began in 1934 as National Allied Publications. He later found Detective Comics. That's right, DC does stand for Detective Comics. This was later purchased by Warner Brothers in 1969 and has been known as DC Comics ever since. And so Warner Brothers was really an early media conglomerate that looked to purchase different properties. Warner Brothers actually owned Atari video games for a bit as well before spinning it off and selling it off. But Warner Brothers was really the first media conglomerate to invest in comic books. And so we can see here with Detective Comics, we can see that Batman largely and Superman are really the two blockbuster heroes when it comes to the box office. And of course, this is in millions. But we can see that these movies are darker in nature typically. And typically the origin stories are a bit harsher. Not all the time, but DC Comics does have a brooding kind of quality or characteristic to it versus kind of a sunnier disposition over at Marvel, though not too sunny, as the superheroes do have sad origin stories as well. Now, the stable of heroes that DC Comics has are kind of based around this idea of being detectives. They're based around this idea of being super detectives, but nonetheless being detectives, doing sleuth work, thinking through things, critical thinking, piecing puzzles together. So we see this with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman, and even Green Lantern as well. DC is on television thanks to the CW, which is owned in part by Warner Brothers. And so the channel itself has worked to expand its cadre of different heroes that are featured, to introduce new heroes to new audiences. And so the Flash, Arrow, Supergirl, these are heroes that have been spoken about in the past, have been featured in comic books in the past, but are less prevalent, or they're less renowned or well-known versus other superheroes, particularly in the aforementioned list. Recent DC movies. So we had Shazam in 2019, which performed pretty well. Wonder Woman 1984 was supposed to be debuting this past year. We'll see if it debuts in 2021 at this point. Joker origin movie takes place in the 1980s, was phenomenal and debuted in 2019. Kind of offered a film noir take on Joker. It explored aspects of mental health. And the movie really struck, I would argue, the true voice of DC Comics, which is meant to be darker, a bit more adult in nature as well. Current state of health of comic books. There have been recent slumps in superhero comic sales. There also may be diversity fatigue here with some of these comics. In the last 20 years, there really has been this push for diversity in comic books, which I'm all for. But I do think when you create a crowded marketplace, it can become exhausting and difficult. Afro-Latino Spider-Man, Muslim Miss Marvel, a female Thor, a homosexual Iceman, Korean Hulk, African-American Iron Man, and a homosexual Latina America Chavez. There's nothing wrong with any of these superheroes. In fact, as we said earlier, science fiction and fantasy are great places in which we can explore culturally progressive issues, LGBTQ issues, issues of inclusion and diversity for sure. I do think the issue is we've had so many superheroes established over the last 50 to 70 years that this platform may be tough to start introducing diverse superheroes. But nonetheless, it's good to see that efforts are being made. There was about a 10% growth in comic book sales from 2010 to 2015. but it did fall about 5% in 2016. So we know that initially all of these Marvel and DC movies did offer a bump up in comic book sales, but there's been a decline since. So competing ecosystems. This is the last phase of this lecture, and thank you so much for being with me during this. This is our first time kind of doing a Zoom presentation style of late night learning, but I'm eager and excited to be doing this. Thank you for tuning in with me. So I want you to think about the competing ecosystems here. We have so many superheroes, so many movies, so many books, comics, theme park attractions. How do we avoid competition? If we are stewards of the Batman franchise, if we're stewards of the Spider-Man franchise, how do we avoid competition closely with Batman or Superman or anybody else for that matter? Blue Ocean Strategy says pursuit of differentiation and at a low cost. Companies can either create high value for consumers at a higher cost or create reasonable value at a lower cost. We know that superhero movies do not cost pennies. And so at this particular junction, it's kind of important to realize that, in fact, these movies have been ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up special effects, villains, actors, whatever they can do to really create high value. The Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy create high value because it's not just one superhero or not just one supervillain, right? It's a bunch. And so that's one way that a lot of these franchises have been able to compete. In contrast, this strategy eliminates factors industry competes on and creates factors the industry has never engaged with, also known as value innovation. And so when we think about this, the Avengers and Suicide Squad, at a certain point, superhero movies, really it only featured one hero, one villain, right? And then we went to two heroes and two villains. We did that with Batman franchises, and we had that here and there. But here, we know that the Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy to really compete against these movies because they can't be made any cheaper, right? That's kind of out of the question for the superhero genre. The best we can do is ratchet up, right? Go up, increase the bombasticness of the movie, the appeal, the sex, the glamour, the action, the violence. And the way to do that is to have a group of stellar actors and actresses who come together for these seismic movies. Blue Ocean Strategy. So rather than produce another movie, but by Marvel, by DC Comics or what have you, that it features just one superhero or two superheroes or what have you, Red Ocean Strategy states that if we compete in an existing market, right, if we're a movie executive, we compete in an existing market in which every superhero movie that has been made features a man as the hero, right? That's one place in which Wonder Woman was able to very successfully compete on, or offers one hero, which again, Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy was able to compete against. These singular hero movies are a red ocean, right? There's dozens and dozens of Ant-Man and Spider-Man and Batman, all of these movies that feature one superhero competing in an existing market space. It's a red ocean. It's a red ocean because it's bloody, it's competitive, it's very, very difficult if you're going to be, the 100th movie made on one superhero to be interesting. Exploit existing demand and make the value cost trade-off. So if you're going to go into a red ocean and make Shazam, right, or make another superhero movie featuring one superhero, there better be some catch. There better be something that really does differentiate you. Blue Ocean, which is what the Avengers did, followed by, or Guardians of the Galaxy did, followed by Avengers, and so on and so forth, is they created uncontested market space, right? Nobody had ever seen an Avengers movie like that before, or had seen a Guardians of the Galaxy movie like that before. And so it makes the competition irrelevant because Guardians of the Galaxy or the Avengers, whichever franchise came out first, escapes me at the moment, wasn't competing against Spider-Man. It wasn't competing against Batman. It wasn't competing against Superman. It wasn't competing against Iron Man. It was competing against none of those because it was its own product. There had never been a marketplace with multiple superheroes in a movie before. It was exceptionally rare and really wasn't established. It makes the competition irrelevant, and it creates new demand. It breaks off value cost trade-off. You don't have to trade off value at a cost or think about, well, let's spend less, or we can only afford this, or we can only have this. There are no trade-offs here because you're not competing against anybody else. You've created a brand new marketplace. You align the whole system of a firm's activities in pursuit of differentiation and low cost. So now the question is, now that the market is there with the Avengers, with Justice League, with Guardians of the Galaxy, can we make these movies a bit cheaper, right? Because once you're in that space, now you have to think about different ways of differentiating yourself. Maybe it is having better actors or actresses, or the movie taking place elsewhere, maybe in space. We know the next Mission Impossible will have Tom Cruise actually acting in space. That's one way to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, to be sure. Value innovation. So the idea that market boundaries may be reconstructed, and Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers have helped reconstruct the marketplace. Search for low-cost options and raise perceived buyer value here. People believe they get a better bang for their buck watching the Avengers that has 15 superheroes and supervillains versus Spider-Man, which may have 1 or 2 or 3 at most. So the idea is converting non-customers to customers. How do you convince people to go see the Avengers when they're used to seeing Batman or Spider-Man? Is there a compelling reason for people to purchase your product? Oh yeah, you get a really, really incredible, fantastical experience. You get to see everybody. You get to see everybody interacting with each other. You get to see these superheroes live more of an interactive life in which they know the other superheroes and they're facing off against these villains. Is your offering priced to attract the mass of target buyers so they have a compelling ability to buy for it? Yeah, these movies cost the same. The Avengers cost $15 to see, so does a singular movie featuring one superhero. So on a cost or price basis, it would be asinine to even compare the two, right? We can watch the next Batman that comes out, or we can go see another Avengers movie or Guardians of the Galaxy movie that has tons and tons of superheroes and villains, really filling an incredibly complex and engaging story arc. Can you produce your offering at the strategic price and earn a profit? Most superhero movies cost $200 million, $250 million. With some creative Hollywood accounting, yeah, you're able to do so, and you can have a star-studded cast. What are the adoption hurdles in rolling out your idea, and have you addressed them upfront? Well, it can be difficult for people to think about, why would I go see a movie with a bunch of superheroes? But for most people, it offers an opportunity to see everybody at the same price. And again, to be exposed to an incredible narrative arc they probably wouldn't be exposed to in a singular hero movie. We've seen the blue ocean strategy before with the Nintendo Wii. Nintendo Wii used hand motion capturing, right? The idea of capturing the video game player as being the controller. There was no other video game console that had done this, and it speaks volumes about why it did so well. It focused on consumer feelings toward it. The Wii was cheaper than other consoles, Xbox 360, PS3. It's valuable to go after low cost and differentiation. The Wii did both. It went after older non-gamers, parents, elderly, and very young children. If we think about the Avengers, and if we think about Guardians of the Galaxy, they've gone after everyone. Most superhero movies have tried to go after as many people as possible. The best way to do this, of course, is to have more and more superheroes and villains incorporated into your movie. There we go again with ingredient branding. The idea that we take different branded ingredients, people know who Batman is, people know who Joker is, and put them in a parent brand. The Avengers, Justice League 2, Suicide Squad. That's that parent brand. And then the ingredients are the actors and actresses and producers and writers and directors that we can all put together to make the parent brand look better. Nuggets to take home. When we think about storytelling, we think about transmedia storytelling and franchises. Write about what you know. For anybody here eager to create their next franchise, write about what you know. You're often more inclined to be able to give in-depth analysis, strong character arcs, complex plots, conflicting tensions, rising tensions, and great resolutions if you know about the subject matter, and especially if you know about it in depth. Create a wide net for opportunity. Remember, if you're creating this transmedia world like Marvel has, with this vast ecosystem of superheroes and villains that interact with each other, allow people to get incorporated and to get involved and engaged at multiple strategies. Consider your audience when building a transmedia ecosystem. So there's been a debate, and I want to end with this. And again, please write your comments down at the end. There's been exhaustion from transmedia properties. These properties that are bombastic, that are big, that are loud, that are aggressive, that are sharp and action-packed. Steven Spielberg has stated that we may have superhero fatigue after a while. They may disappear like Western films. We know that we've had a few Westerns in the past, but they're few and far between. Will we have superhero fatigue? This is something that I want you to think about. You can either pause the video or just simply end the video and then put your comments down below. But I am curious to know, will we ever have superhero fatigue? I want to thank you all for participating with me on this particular lecture. Thank you so much for being a part of the first Zoom session here in Charlottesville, Virginia regarding late night learning. I look forward to recording more of these. As always, keep laughing and keep learning. Thank you very much.